I never expected to find myself standing outside the family home, phone in hand, staring at the screen where I just wired $5,000 to cover my mother's overdue utilities. The word "thanks, I guess" blinked back at me, curt and cold, from my mom's text. It was like a slap wrapped in indifference. $5,000, hard-earned money from the tech startup I built from scratch, gone in an instant to cover problems nobody else seemed willing to fix. I swallowed the sting. This was my reality. I'm Joy Hutchinson, 28 years old, CEO of a quietly thriving software company that's beginning to disrupt the industry. But at family gatherings, I'm invisible, a shadow in the background. The silent provider no one really acknowledges. I'm the one who pays the bills, bails out relatives, and smooths over crises without complaint. The irony is sharp. I'm the backbone. Yet the family treats me like I'm nothing more than a walking ATM. Last week, Crystal Townsend, my sister-in-law, cut into me mid-family dinner with a smirk that didn't even try to hide her contempt. "So, Joy," she sneered, waving her glass with exaggerated boredom, "still playing CEO of that little startup? When will you get a real job that actually matters?" The words hit me like a slap. The room went quiet. A few cousins snickered behind cupped hands. My cheeks flushed, but I forced a smile and said nothing. I wanted to shout back, to tell her exactly what I thought of her entitled arrogance, but I kept my mouth shut. Mark, my husband, caught my eye from across the table, his look full of silent support mixed with frustration. I wanted to believe things would change, that my family would one day see me for more than just a bank account. I clung to that hope, even as I felt the distance grow. What they didn't know was that the family home, worth nearly $1 million, was in my name alone, a secret power I'd never revealed. For now, I let the wounds lie beneath the surface, believing that time and patience would earn me the respect I deserved. Growing up, the battle for acceptance wasn't new. It was etched into every family event. I remember one Christmas in particular when I was 16. Crystal arrived with gifts piled high, all shiny and expensive, each wrapped in glossy paper with perfect bows. She was the golden child, the one showered with compliments and smiles. Meanwhile, I sat quietly with my handmade gifts, simple, heartfelt, but clearly not enough. Our parents' voices floated above me, praising Crystal as the shining star, while my efforts were dismissed as trying too hard. The sting of their words was unbearable. I overheard my mother whisper to Crystal, "You're the one who'll carry this family forward." The heaviness of that phrase crushed me, but I told myself it was tough love, a way to prepare me for the real world. I convinced myself that Crystal's charm earned her favoritism and that someday I'd find my own place. But the sharpest wound came when my college tuition application was quietly ignored, while Crystal's requests for funding were met immediately. That moment planted a seed of bitterness and self-doubt that I still carry. Despite the coldness, I chose to sacrifice rather than fight. Over the last 3 years, I've quietly contributed over $150,000 to keep this family afloat. Mortgage payments, medical bills for grandma, college fees for the nieces and nephews. Twice I canceled vacations I'd planned for years to cover unexpected emergencies. When a major promotion required relocating across the country, I declined, choosing instead to stay close and support my family, even if it meant slowing my career growth. Mark often worries aloud, his voice thick with concern. "Joy, you're giving too much." They don't see it. They never will. But I hold on to the belief that love is unconditional, and that my sacrifices will eventually be recognized. The house, our family home, paid for with my savings and legally titled in my name, is my silent leverage, though I haven't dared share that truth with anyone yet. It's my secret power, a quiet assurance amid the storm of neglect and entitlement swirling around me. That hope was tested at a recent birthday dinner for my brother Steve. The air was thick with forced cheer, laughter punctuated by Crystal's sharp jabs. As the conversation turned to my latest promotion, she couldn't resist. "So what?" she said loud enough for half the room to hear. "It's just some startup nonsense. When will you get a real job?" The room froze. Some relatives snickered. Others looked away, uncomfortable. My heart pounded in my chest like a drumbeat of embarrassment. A sharp pang of shame washed over me, but I plastered on a smile, muttering, "Maybe you're right," more to deflect than confess. I excused myself, needing fresh air to catch my breath. Mark found me on the porch moments later, his voice low and steady. "Don't let her get to you." I nodded, telling myself Crystal was just stressed, trying to brush it off. But as I stood there, the cool night air brushing my skin, the seed of doubt took hold. I wondered if my efforts would ever be enough, if the family I loved would ever truly accept me. After that night on the porch, I thought maybe I could just step back, keep my head down, and avoid the barbs. But Crystal had other plans. It didn't take long for her to notice my retreat from the usual family gatherings, my careful silence when she poked at me. Instead of backing off, she went on the offensive, and suddenly I was drowning in whispers and sideways glances. The rumor mill churned faster than I could keep up. "Joy's too self-absorbed," I overheard my aunt say at the grocery store. "All she cares about is money," my cousin muttered to her friend. It was like a slow poison seeping through the family veins, tainting every interaction. Crystal had somehow convinced others that I was this cold, calculating woman who only showed up when there was a bill to pay. Steve, my own brother, who I thought I could count on, was pulled into her web. I caught snippets of his messages when I glanced at his phone screen over breakfast. "Why are you expecting so much?" And, "Can't you be a little less demanding?" They were always careful to frame it as concern, but it felt like betrayal. I tried to explain myself, but my words bounced off a wall of suspicion. Then the texts started. One from Crystal. "You're just being sensitive, Joy. This is family banter." The phrase echoed through every family group chat, repeated by cousins and even my mother. "It's not personal, just teasing." But it was personal. It cut me to the bone. I began to doubt myself, questioning if maybe I was overreacting, if I was the one making mountains out of molehills. The isolation was suffocating. I found myself shrinking, watching my back at every gathering, afraid that any smile I offered would be weaponized against me. One afternoon, I sat on the couch staring at my phone, the glow illuminating the tear tracks on my cheeks. I typed out a message to Mark, but deleted it before sending. Am I really the problem? The thought haunted me, twisting my stomach into knots. I could feel the walls tightening, the distance growing colder by the day. I wanted to scream at Crystal, to confront the family, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I buried myself in work, hoping to drown out the noise. But Crystal's campaign was relentless. I could almost hear her voice sneering behind every insult disguised as a joke, every harmless jab. The family had become a battlefield, and I was alone in the trenches, desperate for peace. I reached out to Mom, asking her to mediate a family meeting. I wanted us to sit down, talk honestly, and clear the air. When the day came, I arrived early, heart pounding, clutching a carefully prepared list of everything I'd done for the family. Financial support, emotional labor, sacrifices made without complaint. Linda, my mother, sat between Crystal and me, her expression unreadable but calm. I took a deep breath and spoke carefully. "I've done my best to support all of you, but I feel unappreciated. I want us to find a way forward without pain or resentment." Crystal's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She wiped away a tear and said, voice trembling, "Joy thinks she's better than us. We're just tired of her attitude." Linda nodded, casting a glance my way with thinly veiled skepticism. "Maybe you're overblowing things, Joy," she said quietly. "Sometimes families just have tough dynamics, and you need to accept that." I felt my throat tighten, the sting of those words sharper than any insult Crystal had thrown. My carefully laid case crumbled beneath the weight of their united dismissal. I tried to interject, to explain how their words and actions hurt me, but Linda cut me off gently, signaling that the meeting was over. I left the room with a hollow ache gnawing at my chest. The silence in the hallway felt deafening. I wanted to believe the meeting would change something, but the cold reality settled over me like a shroud. No one was willing to see my side, to acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. Instead, I was branded the villain, the outsider. The hope I'd clung to dimmed but didn't vanish entirely. Somewhere deep inside, I promised myself I wouldn't give up. Not yet. A week later, at a professional networking event that included a few distant family members, Crystal made her move with brutal precision. I had hoped to keep my personal and professional lives separate, but she shattered that line with a cruel public display. I was mingling with potential investors and clients when I heard it. Her voice, loud and cutting, carrying across the room. "Remember when Joy nearly went bankrupt? That's not success." My heart stalled. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized she was airing my darkest, most vulnerable failures to a crowd that included people whose opinion mattered deeply to me. I froze, cheeks burning with humiliation. The room's chatter dulled as heads turned towards us. I caught Mark's eyes, wide with shock and anger, but there was nothing he could say to undo the damage. A key client, a woman who had shown genuine interest in partnering with me, walked away, shaking her head. Later, I found out I'd lost a contract worth $20,000 because of that moment. The financial hit stung, but the blow to my reputation cut deeper. I felt exposed, raw. Crystal's smug smile as she walked away made my skin crawl. This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate, calculated, ruthless. She had weaponized my past failures to tear me down, publicly and mercilessly. That night, when Mark and I sat in the quiet of our living room, his voice low and steady, I realized the battle was far from over. "I'm so sorry, Joy." They crossed a line. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's more than that. It's war." The betrayal stung harder because it came not from strangers, but from the people I called family. Despite everything, I decided to try one last time. I sent out invitations for the next family gathering, and to Crystal, I included a personal note. "I want us to move past this. I need respect and honesty. Let's try to find peace." My hands trembled as I wrote it, the vulnerability of my words hanging in the balance. When the day came, I poured my energy into hosting, a painstaking effort to build bridges. Crystal arrived, feigning gratitude, smiling sweetly as she accepted my invitation. But beneath the surface, the storm was brewing. In front of everyone, she subtly undermined me again, making snide remarks thinly disguised as jokes, casting doubt on my achievements. Afterward, I sought her out in private, determined to finally get clarity. "Crystal, I'm telling you what I need. Respect, honesty, a chance to be part of this family. Can we please just talk?" The chill in her eyes made my skin prickle. She looked at me with cold amusement and said, "You'll never be one of us until you're successful by our standards. That's just how it is." The rejection was brutal. A final door slammed shut in my face. I stood there, heartbreaking yet strangely calm. I whispered to myself, I did everything I could. The fight inside me flickered but did not extinguish. I knew now the price of family was steep, and sometimes love was weaponized as a tool of cruelty. The fallout was immediate, brutal, and suffocating. Crystal's poisonous whispers had already taken root in the family, but when she seized the recent incident as ammunition, it felt like a tidal wave crashing down on me. The relatives who once exchanged polite nods with me now barely met my eyes. Murmurs followed me like a shadow. "Playing the victim again," they said in hushed tones, echoing Crystal's venomous phrase. The sick irony was that the only thing I had done was stand up quietly for myself, and yet here I was, cast as a disruptor, a troublemaker. The isolation was more than physical. It was an erosion of the bonds I thought were unbreakable. Steve, my own brother, was the most painful blow. Once someone I could confide in, he now seemed to slip further away with each encounter. One afternoon, his words pierced deeper than any insult from Crystal. "Maybe you are the problem, Joy. Maybe you're the one who doesn't fit." He said it gently, almost like a reluctant truth he wished didn't sting so much. His disappointment was like an icy blade twisting inside me. I searched his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but it was gone. The brother I once knew was replaced by a stranger who had swallowed Crystal's poison. Mark's unwavering support was my only anchor in this storm, but even his steady presence couldn't fill the cavernous loneliness spreading inside me. Every day became a test of endurance. I found myself retreating deeper into silence, questioning every word I spoke, every action I took. The self-doubt was relentless. gnawing at the edges of my confidence until it frayed like worn fabric. I caught myself whispering into the void, maybe I am the one who's wrong. It wasn't a surrender, not yet, but a fragile fracture forming beneath my resolve. The weight pressed down on me, a silent suffocation that no amount of professional success could counteract. My mind spun through the memories, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar quietly given. Was it all for nothing? The thought was unbearable, yet it taunted me with cruel persistence. One night, alone in our dimly lit living room, I let the tears come without shame. The cold air from the cracked window brushed against my damp skin, a stark contrast to the burning ache in my chest. I thought about how I had always been the peacemaker, the one who swallowed bitterness for the sake of family harmony. But now the harmony was shattered, and I was left alone in the ruins. The phone screen glowed cold beside me, the messages from relatives and distant family friends echoing Crystal's narrative. That bitter phrase, playing victim, looped in my mind like a broken record. It felt impossible to escape, a cage forged from other people's perceptions. I pressed my palm against my forehead, willing the storm inside to quiet. Yet, beneath the confusion and pain, a tiny ember flickered, a whisper that the end of this isolation might be somewhere just beyond the horizon. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with a sharp, biting sting that no holiday joy could mask. My phone vibrated with a buzz that sent my heart sinking before I even glanced at the screen. A family group text from Mom, Linda, was waiting. "Don't come to Thanksgiving until you're actually successful." The words hit like cold steel, crafted with a cruelty that shocked me to the core. My eyes blurred as I scrolled down, and there it was, Crystal's edition, merciless and blunt. "We're tired of your excuses and failures." The message wasn't just a dismissal. It was a public humiliation broadcast to everyone we knew. Relatives, friends, even some of my professional contacts. The betrayal was so blatant it felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I stared at the screen, frozen, as the cruel irony unfolded. Moments later, another notification popped up, an article from Forbes, featuring my photo and story. The headline read, "Joy Hutchinson, 28, CEO and founder, net worth $4.8 billion. The article celebrated my hard-fought success, the company I had built from nothing, the accolades I had earned through sweat and sleepless nights. And yet, the very people who should have been proud of me had chosen to publicly shame me instead. The gulf between what I had achieved and how my family saw me yawned wide and deep. The veil lifted in that instant. Their rejection wasn't about my success or failures. It was about control, entitlement, and a bitter refusal to accept me on my terms. The hope I'd clung to vanished, replaced by a chilling clarity that cut away all illusions. The cold clarity didn't bring rage, at least not yet. It was a quiet, measured understanding that the game had changed. I felt something break inside me, not a surrender, but the hardening of resolve. The pain was still raw, the sting of betrayal fresh, but beneath it all, a calculated calm started to take root. This was no longer about seeking approval or forgiveness. It was about facing the truth with open eyes and preparing to navigate the battlefield with a new strategy. The family I loved had shown their true colors, and I was no longer naive enough to hope they would see me differently. The time for passive endurance was over. Now everything had to be deliberate, strategic, and silent. No fireworks, no drama, just quiet, unyielding strength. I sought refuge in solitude, retreating to the quiet corners of our home where the weight of the world felt slightly less suffocating. I replayed the years of efforts in my mind, the unpaid debts I covered when no one else could, the sacrifices I made, canceling vacations and deferring dreams to support others' emergencies, the relentless emotional labor, smoothing over cracks in relationships I wasn't even sure I wanted to save anymore, the constant unacknowledged work, the invisible threads I'd woven to hold this family together, stretched tight and then frayed under the latest blow. As the memories surfaced, pain mingled with a rising tide of anger, a slow burn at first, then an intense fire that refused to be extinguished. I just didn't want to see it, I whispered to the empty room. The realization was bitter. They never truly valued me, never really wanted to. My kindness had been mistaken for weakness, my generosity for obligation. The years of quiet sacrifices had not earned respect. They had earned contempt. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but acceptance brought an unexpected liberation. The injustice that had been a chain binding me became a call to arms. Never again, I vowed, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. My grief transformed, crystallizing into determination. I thought of the house, the one asset no one knew was mine, the financial leverage I had kept hidden like a secret weapon. For the first time, I saw it not as a burden, but as a source of power, a way to finally tip the scales. The shift was profound. Forgiveness was no longer an option. It was a luxury I couldn't afford. The past was a lesson etched in sharp lines, and the future demanded a new approach. I was no longer a victim in my own story. I was a woman awakening to her strength, ready to reclaim her worth on her own terms. The quiet anger simmered beneath the surface, fueling a cold, clear focus. I knew that whatever came next had to be measured, deliberate, and above all, effective. The stage was set for a reckoning, but it wouldn't be loud or reckless. It would be calculated, using the tools I had long kept close and no longer hidden. That evening, I sat with Mark, the weight of everything pressing between us like a heavy fog. I needed to share my thoughts aloud, break the silence that had grown too thick. No more explanations, I told him, voice steady but firm. No more begging for respect or understanding. I'm done giving them the power to hurt me through my generosity. Mark listened, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of hope or hesitation. When I finished, he nodded slowly, a mixture of support and caution in his gaze. I'm with you, he said quietly. But be careful. This path could stir up more than they expect. We talked late into the night, mapping out a strategy that was as much about protection as it was about reclaiming control. Crystal was our clear focus, the root of much of the venom and manipulation. I knew the first step had to be firm and quiet. Stop all financial aid, cut off communication without drama. The silence itself would be a weapon, a way to make them feel the absence of what they'd taken for granted. They'll notice quickly, I said, feeling a cold thrill at the thought. And they won't know what hit them until it's too late. Mark squeezed my hand, a steady anchor in the storm. We do this smart, Joy. No mistakes. His caution grounded me, reminding me that this was a game of chess, not checkers. I was no longer the woman who tried to buy love with kindness or begged for approval with sacrifice. I was the architect of my own boundaries, and this was the moment I began building walls where once there had only been open doors. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of control, raw, quiet, and undeniable. I sat by the window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the scattered papers on my desk. It was time to take stock, to see clearly the web I had been silently weaving all these years while my family took and took, without ever giving back. I pulled out the bank statements, meticulously organized, revealing the invisible lifeline I had been holding for them. The mortgage payments I alone had covered for the family home, every month like clockwork, without a single complaint. Utility bills, medical insurance premiums for Steve's mounting health issues, even tutoring fees for the kids they all claimed to care for but never supported. The weight of it hit me anew, but this time not with bitterness. I felt a raw clarity settling over me. I reached out to my attorney, Maria, a sharp, no-nonsense woman I trusted implicitly. Sitting across from her in her office, I laid out everything: the house deed in my name alone, the financial obligations I had quietly taken on, and the strings they all pulled without realizing I was holding the scissors. Maria nodded, her eyes steady. You have full legal control, Joy. No one but you can claim rights to that property, and you can withhold support without breaching any agreement, given it's your money. Her words were both a shield and a sword. Back home, I began gathering proof. Screenshots of Crystal's social media, flaunting expensive vacations and new designer bags, paid for by funds I had sent her repeatedly. Text messages where she casually requested, just a little more to cover this. Or, you know how things get tight, always with that tone of entitlement that made my skin crawl. I compiled bank transfers, highlighting just how often I had been the invisible ATM for a family who treated generosity as a given. But more importantly, I mapped their vulnerabilities. Crystal drowning in her credit card debt, Linda's dependence on the mortgage payments to keep the house afloat, Steve's unpaid medical bills that left him vulnerable without my coverage. The thought settled deep. They need me far more than I need them. That night, I whispered to myself, the power has always been mine. The realization was intoxicating. Finally, I understood the leverage I held in this toxic dynamic, not as a victim, but as a woman who had quietly carried the weight, now ready to shift the balance. I wasn't blind to the risk. This knowledge was dangerous. But for the first time in a long while, I felt steady and prepared. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control and demanding the respect I deserved. The next days felt like a careful choreography of silence and calculation. I updated every password, bank accounts, utility providers, even the shared family email. I instructed my bank to freeze automatic transfers to all family accounts, a move that felt like severing an umbilical cord. I notified the energy company that the mortgage and utility bills would now be paid by the household alone, giving responsibility back to those who had long shirked it. My phone, once a constant ring of Crystal's demands and Linda's pleas, fell eerily silent or filled with calls I deliberately ignored. Yet, in front of the family, I wore a mask of calm. At social gatherings, I laughed easily, answered casual questions with neutral smiles, careful never to give away the storm brewing beneath. Mark noticed the difference, whispering, "You're like a glacier, cold but so powerful." I let the words pass, focusing instead on the quiet tension building like a coiled spring. Family members began noticing the subtle changes, missed payments on their end, the slow unraveling of the safety net they had always taken for granted, but no one could quite explain it. They attributed it to forgetfulness, maybe a temporary strain. Nobody suspected this was a silent, deliberate withdrawal. Each unanswered call from Crystal felt like a small victory, a crack in her once impenetrable facade. The guilt she tried to load onto me now ricocheted back, empty and ineffective. Linda's voice, once so insistent, grew quieter, her messages less frequent, as if sensing the shift but unable to stem it. I felt like a time bomb, the tension mounting quietly, every moment a calm before a storm long overdue. As I sat in the quiet of our home, the empty spaces between the phone's notifications felt like the sound of my own heartbeat, steady, controlled, ready. One evening, alone in the dim glow of my study lamp, I was rifling through old legal documents for Maria when something caught my eye. A thin, folded letter tucked behind a sheaf of papers. It was a codicil to my late grandfather's will, something no one had ever mentioned. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The ink faded, but the words searingly clear. It revealed that my mother, Linda, had diverted $200,000 of my rightful inheritance, money meant for my education and the seed capital for my startup, into Crystal's name without my knowledge or consent. The letter was unmistakable proof of deliberate financial betrayal. My breath caught, the room spinning slightly as the weight of the discovery dropped into my chest. This wasn't just emotional manipulation or entitled cruelty anymore. It was a systemic theft, designed to keep me dependent and powerless. My mother had been complicit in this deception, aligning with Crystal to rob me of my future. The betrayal stung deeper than any insult, cutting through the fog of denial I'd held onto for years. I sank into my chair, feeling the cold rush of anger and grief intertwine, freezing my blood. Yet beneath the shock, a fierce clarity emerged. This twisted scheme illuminated the true depth of their greed and entitlement. The pattern of exploitation wasn't accidental. It was calculated and ongoing. I whispered to myself through clenched teeth, "They built their power on my downfall." This revelation did not break me. It fueled a fire I hadn't known was smoldering inside. The urgency to act, to reclaim not just my dignity, but what was stolen from me, surged through every fiber of my being. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. Mark sat beside me, silent but present, sensing the shift in my spirit. "Whatever you need, I'm here," he said quietly. I nodded, feeling the weight lift just slightly because I wasn't alone in this. The betrayal was now a weapon forged in truth, and I was ready to wield it. The next morning marked the first real steps of my quiet rebellion. I stopped every payment: mortgage, utilities, medical insurance, tutoring fees. The financial support that had been the family's invisible lifeline was severed without a word. My phone became a wall of silence. Crystal's calls and texts went unanswered, bouncing into voicemail or ignored outright. Linda's desperate pleas, once filled with false warmth and manipulation, evaporated into nothing. I even blocked their access on social media, cutting off the channels they had used to monitor and belittle me. The sudden withdrawal puzzled the family. Whispers spread. Was I angry, upset, or simply pulling away? None of them suspected the calculated nature of my actions, the deliberate stripping away of support to expose their reliance on me. Crystal's world began to unravel almost immediately. Late fees piled up, credit limits were breached, and the glossy social media posts slowed, becoming more desperate, less confident. The entitled smiles I had so often seen turned to strained, anxious expressions. They were feeling the first real consequences of their exploitation. Through it all, I remained composed, my demeanor cool and methodical. I refused to let them see the satisfaction simmering beneath my calm exterior. Mark watched closely, pride flickering in his eyes but tempered by caution. "You're changed," he said softly. "Stronger, but stay sharp." I nodded, knowing this was just the beginning, a measured strike to reclaim my boundaries and my life. The quiet retraction of my support was a message more powerful than any confrontation. It was a declaration. I was no longer the safety net they could take for granted, and I was ready to stand firm, no matter how high the cost. The air was thick with the chatter of relatives and neighbors at the family reunion, everyone wrapped in the warmth of familiarity and the light hum of small talk. I stood there, feeling the weight of every eye, every whispered comment brushing against my skin like invisible fingers. The moment had arrived. I drew a slow breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs, steadying the tremble I felt beneath my calm exterior. There was no turning back now, not after all the years of silence and unseen sacrifice. I met Crystal's gaze across the room, her expression flickering from smug certainty to something like unease. Linda stood close by, her posture stiff, eyes darting between me and the crowd. "I have something important to share," I began, my voice carrying clearly over the soft murmur. The room quieted, the casual conversations folding into a hushed tension. For years, I've been the silent support behind this family, the one paying mortgages, covering bills, and holding everything together while going unnoticed, or worse, undervalued. My eyes swept the crowd, landing on familiar faces, some surprised, some guarded. "But I'm no longer your bank or your punching bag." The words felt like a hammer striking cold stone, and I let the silence linger, letting it settle like dust in the air. I unfolded the truth slowly, deliberately. There was a codicil to my grandfather's will, one no one mentioned. It reveals financial betrayal, money that was meant for me, diverted without my knowledge. This wasn't just oversight, it was a calculated act of theft. Crystal gasped sharply, the sound sharp and raw, breaking her facade. I continued, voice steady but firm. "I've endured emotional abuse, manipulation, and exploitation. But today, that ends. No more access, no more excuses." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of shock and disbelief. Steve and Mark exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to quiet support. Family members around us began nodding subtly, a sense of allegiance pivoting toward me. "This isn't about revenge," I said, eyes locking with Crystal's cold stare. "It's about respect, boundaries, and reclaiming what was stolen. Not just money, but my dignity." I could sense the shift, the power dynamic flipping like a switch. Crystal's control was crumbling in real time, her entitlement exposed under the weight of facts. Linda's face drained of color. The room no longer buzzed with idle gossip. It was a court of reckoning, and I was no longer the defendant but the judge. The quiet nods from once skeptical relatives were a balm, a sign that the respect I'd long sought was finally being recognized. not out of pity, but out of acknowledgement. Crystal's voice was a sharp whisper, desperate and brittle. Joy, this isn't fair. But I was beyond argument. Fair or not, it's real, and it's happening now. I stepped back, letting the truth settle among them. The weight of years of quiet endurance was lifted in that moment, replaced by a certainty that no one could deny. The family had witnessed the unveiling of the unseen power I held, and with it, the promise that things would never be the same again. The fallout came swiftly, like a storm breaking over calm seas. Almost immediately after the reunion, overdue notices began flooding Crystal's phone, the shrill ring of creditor calls breaking the fragile illusion she had maintained. Each message was a reminder that the financial safety net I once provided had been silently withdrawn. Crystal's desperate texts lit up my screen one after another. Pleas for forgiveness, promises to change, frantic requests for even a fraction of the support she'd taken for granted. But my replies were coldly absent. I had chosen silence as my strongest boundary, and I would not bend for cries that came only after the damage was done. Linda's calls followed, filled with thinly veiled threats and hollow apologies, but even she seemed shaken. The house bills they had all depended on were piling up unpaid, and the social standing they clung to was crumbling under the weight of their debts. I watched as friends and family who had once blindly backed Crystal began to question the narrative they'd accepted without scrutiny. Whispers of regret fluttered through the family grapevine, voices wondering how they had missed the signs, how they had been so easily misled. Even Steve, hesitant but honest, started to distance himself, pulled away by the undeniable truth that Crystal's story didn't add up. Each desperate outreach from Crystal felt like a defeat, each ignored message a silent assertion of my boundaries. I felt the cold satisfaction of justice unfolding, not in loud confrontations or dramatic scenes, but in the quiet, deliberate withdrawal of trust and resources. It was a lesson writ in the language they had always understood: consequence. Crystal's world was unraveling, thread by thread, but I refused to let anger or cruelty taint the moment. My role was no longer the victim or the rescuer. I was the woman who had reclaimed her power, steady and unyielding. Crystal's tactics escalated, shifting from financial desperation to emotional manipulation, but I was prepared. The threats of lawsuits, the accusations of betrayal, the whispered campaigns to rally distant relatives, all fell flat against the armor I had built. Social media posts framed her as the victim, spinning narratives of sacrifice and injustice, but my resolve was unshaken. I had the evidence, the legal backing, and the clarity I'd fought so hard to attain. I declined every attempt to bait me into conflict, knowing that silence was the most potent response to her bluster. Some family members, once swayed by Crystal's charm and lies, reached out privately to apologize. Their words were tentative, regretful, acknowledging their blindness and their part in the cycle of abuse. I received their apologies with quiet grace, neither fully embracing nor rejecting them. My boundaries were firm, a line drawn not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. I understood that forgiveness was a process, not a demand, and that trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. Crystal found herself increasingly isolated, her confidence eroding with each failed attempt to regain control. The family web she had woven began to unravel, strands of loyalty snapping under the weight of truth and consequence. Though she fought fiercely to maintain her place, the cracks in her armor grew too wide to hide. I observed from a distance, the cold clarity of a woman who had been through fire and emerged tempered, ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, the quiet that settled over my life felt like the softest kind of victory. Mark and I had reclaimed our home, the mortgage fully paid in my name, a fortress built not just of brick and wood, but of hard-won autonomy and peace. Thanksgiving passed with no drama, no whispered tensions or veiled accusations, just a small gathering of close friends and the steady warmth of those who truly mattered. I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come, how the chaos and the fight had faded into a distant memory. I no longer missed the approval that had never been freely given, the exhausting dance of seeking validation from those who would never offer it. Respect, I realized, was not something to be demanded or bought. It was earned through integrity and boundaries. The freedom I felt was not just financial, but deeply personal, a reclaiming of myself from the shadows of manipulation and exploitation. Crystal and Linda remained on the periphery of my world, their hold broken, their influence diminished to whispers lost in the wind. As I looked toward the future, it was smaller, quieter, but brighter. The weight of obligation had lifted, replaced by a steady hope that came from knowing my worth and guarding it fiercely. I wasn't naive enough to think the past would disappear completely, but I was strong enough to live beyond it. The power that had once been hidden was now mine to wield with grace and determination, a testament to a woman who refused to be broken. And in that, I found a peace that no betrayal, no manipulation could ever take away.